Good evening. I'm Beth Bronk, Director of Bands here at Texas Lutheran University. We're delighted to be a part of this year's Krost Symposium. The piece that we're going to play for you tonight is one written by composer Julie Giroux. I first got to know Julie as the commission composer for the 2015 Kappa Kappa Psi and Tau Beta Sigma National Intercollegiate Band. Working with her for the 2 years leading up to the summer convention in which her commissioned work was premiered, I got to know a funny, self-deprecating, honest, hard-working person who connected with students easily and had a great way of explaining her music. One of my favorite stories from her is that when she was a college student at LSU, she was composing jingles for a living, and she was desperately trying to finish a job that was due the next day. It was a jingle for a cat food commercial, and she was struggling for inspiration. Fueled by her deadline and perhaps an adult beverage or two, and as she has said, she recalls softly singing meow in a descending scale pattern. Meow, 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 meow. The Meow Mix commercial. And that's how that came about. So she still gets royalty checks from that. And as a matter of fact, has probably made more money from that than almost any of her other compositions, which have really been just a work of love. So if you've ever heard the Meow Mix theme, she's getting money right then. So Julie also says that almost all the incidental music playing in the background in movies or documentaries about the Civil War was probably written by her, and she's not kidding about that. But what I didn't know until later was that Julie Giroux was both the first woman and the youngest person ever to win an Emmy in the field of outstanding individual achievement in music direction. She has multiple Oscars, Emmys, Grammys, and Golden Globe Awards, and she dearly loves animals. She has driven across multiple states to rescue the oldest, least attractive dog and bring them to her home to live out their lives. Animal rescue is a passion of hers. She can't visit a shelter without taking one home. So our Castaways is dedicated by her to those who rescue, those who get rescued, and especially to those whose rescue never comes. Thank you so much for letting us be a part of this year's Krost Symposium. Here's Our Castaways by Julie Giroux, performed by the TLU Symphonic Band.
Good evening. Wasn't that a lovely way to start our time together tonight? I'm Debbie Cottrell, Vice President for Academic Affairs, and on behalf of Texas Lutheran University, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this keynote session of the 2019 Krost Symposium, What a Dog Knows, Chasing Canine Cognition. This year's symposium continues what is now a 40-year tradition of assembling scholars, policymakers, community leaders, and others to discuss relevant and important issues of our time. Past Krost Symposium topics range from music and the brain to nuclear war to healthcare, from the theological concepts of suffering and salvation to connecting with comics, and from Central American immigration to creativity. Considered the university's premier academic event, this annual symposium is a central component of TLU's Krost Life Enrichment Program, which was established in 1977 to foster the intellectual, social, physical, and spiritual development of TLU students and the broader community. One of the founding fathers of the Krost Life Enrichment Program and the Krost Symposium was Dr. Frank Giesber, Professor Emeritus of Economics, who served Texas Lutheran as academic dean when the idea of the Krost program and symposium became a reality. Dr. Giesber, who died in 2016, is somewhat of a legendary figure at TLU, known for his deep connections to this place, his intellect, his sense of service, and as one colleague has said, his abiding devotion to the life of the mind. In recognition of Dr. Giesber and his contributions to the establishment and ongoing support of the Krost program, the keynote presentation of each Krost Symposium is now titled the Frank Giesber Lecture. In just a moment, I'll introduce you to the distinguished speaker who will deliver this year's Giesber Lecture. First, let's show our appreciation to those faculty, staff, student, and community organizers of this year's symposium. Dr. Scott Bailey, the Planning Committee Chair, Dr. Robin Bishop, Dr. Allison Bray, Dr. Bill Campaign, Leslie Flores, Hepzibah Hoffman-Rogers, Terry Price, Jonathan Zittelman, and Ashley Ford. Let's give them a round of applause. I also want to acknowledge the underwriting support of TLU's Brown Endowment Fund for Cultural Enrichment for helping make this symposium possible. Established in 2009 by the late Mrs. Jessie Schultz Brown, a Texas Lutheran graduate, and her husband, Dr. Jack H.U. Brown, this fund makes it possible to bring to this stage prominent individuals to present the Giesber Lecture at each Krost Symposium. As we prepare for tonight's engaging event, audience members are asked to make sure that cell phones and other electronic devices are silenced. We also remind you that tonight's event will conclude after a question and answer session for which all audience members are asked to remain. We appreciate the important role you as the audience have tonight in ensuring the success of this special event. This year, we are honored to have Dr. Brian Hare, Professor of Evolutionary Anthropology at Duke University, serve as the speaker for our Giesber Lecture. Dr. Hare holds a bachelor's degree from Emory University and a PhD from Harvard. A member of the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience, he is the founder and co-director of the Duke Canine Cognition Center and the founder of the citizen science enterprise Dognition. A prolific writer, Dr. Hare is the author of The Genius of Dogs, which was co-written with his wife and is a New York Times bestseller. His next book, due out in 2020, is entitled Survival of the Friendliest. Though he is clearly an academic star, my favorite summary of him appeared in one place as simply scientist, author, dog guy. Dr. Hare has traveled to be with us tonight from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where he lives with his family and his best friend, Congo. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to this year's Krost Symposium keynote speaker, Dr. Brian Hare.
Good evening, everybody. I hope you all like dogs. Anybody here like dogs? All right, I thought so. I thought there might be a few dog lovers in Texas. So when Scott Bailey invited me, maybe 2 years ago now, to give this lecture, I knew it would be really fun. I knew I'd find a hall full of people excited to hear what I was going to be talking about. So thank you to Scott for the invitation. Thank you to Debbie for such a kind introduction. And also to Caitlin Locke, who hosted me so far. And she's a senior this year and has done some really interesting research. And that was really fun to hear about the research going on here at your university. And you're going to hear that I'm going to plug an idea for future research at Texas Lutheran in my talk. So before I start, I just want to give you some additional resources already. If you enjoy what you hear, as Debbie said, we've written a book, my wife and I, about the things we're going to talk about today. You can go check out Dognition, dognition.com, which you'll hear about in my talk. It's a website. And then I actually have a free online course via Coursera called Dog, Emotion, and Cognition. And if you're not sick of me after the time I'm with you this evening, you can go hear me for 4 more hours online for free, if that's what you're into. I wanted to make sure I pointed all those things out. Okay, so I am so happy to be, what a cool idea. Scott actually, in his blurb, in his Q&A about designing this event, he said he was jealous of his colleagues who get the chance to work with dogs and dog psychology. Well, I'm jealous of you because you got to organize this cool thing, and I just want to do a plug for what he's put together because many of the people that I pay money and travel all across the country to hear are going to be here and are participating. People like Hal Herzog, Laurie Santos, Gregory Burns, and many others that if I'm at a conference and they're going to speak, I want to be there. So what an incredible group of people he's put together. So at the event, I'm your keynote. What am I going to be talking about? I want to speak to you this evening about what is it that makes dogs cognitively remarkable, first of all. And then can we use cognition, which I'm going to help define tonight. Can we use what we know about cognition to help predict success of working dogs? And do different jobs that dogs do they require different skills, different cognitive skill sets? All right, and then hopefully we'll get there where I won't yammer on too long and I can tell you what we are learning about breed differences from our citizen science data, where people like you are playing cognitive games with their dogs at home, and we're looking at the data now, and we have a huge database where we can answer questions we couldn't before. And then finally, I want to tell you about the future. The future where I think is exciting and bright is thinking about how rearing and different rearing strategies may impact how dogs succeed in jobs that we hope they can do well. All right, so that's our agenda for the evening, and then we can, I'm looking forward to all your questions. So as I said, I go to lots of conferences, and you heard that I hang out with cognitive neuroscientists. I also hang out with a lot of geneticists, and they've got really fancy things they do. They have fMRI machines, they do genomic comparisons, they have incredible computational methods, and I go to all these conferences and I'm just like you. I don't understand any of it. And it's super impressive and very difficult to try to understand the methodology in particular. So I get invited to speak at these same conferences, and then I get up and have to present my methods. So I want to present one of these methods to you, and I hope you will follow along. It's very complicated. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a video where we're going to put food in this box. And then the dog is going to get the food out of the box And then after they get the food out of the box one time, we're going to put more food in the box, and then we're going to lock the box. And then we're going to give it back to the dog again, and we're going to see what the dog does. It's an impossible problem now. The dog can't get the box unlocked. Did everybody follow? All right. So it's kind of embarrassing. Like, I'm up there, and they're talking about all these amazing techniques, comparative genomics and, all the newest DTI, fMRI, measuring white track matters or using lasers to get, single unit neurons to fire, et cetera. And I'm like, well, I put food in a box, and then I see what the dog does. So what I would like to suggest to you, though, is that this science is as powerful as the flashy technical science. Because what unifies all of science is that you can powerfully answer questions. And what I would like to present is that, or share with you, is we've found that this simple little game is quite diagnostic of something that's really important if you care about trying to identify the best dogs to help people. So here's some examples of a couple of dogs that come from the exact same breeding population, they have the exact same rearing history, the exact same training, and they have this task where we've locked the box. This is one strategy. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get this food. The food is mine. I just got the food out of here just a second ago. Oh, it's gonna be so good. I love bacon bits, bacon bits. Meow, 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 meow. This is going to be really amazing. I can do this. It's all about me. All right, here's another strategy. Hey, you've got a thumb, man. You put the thing in there. Help me. Get this out of here. No, I mean it, help me. I'm still here. We're gonna even get a bark, I think, in a second here. Oh, there it is, right? So, completely different strategies to solve the exact same ridiculous, simple problem. And it ends up that one of those strategies predicts if you'll find bombs really well, and the other strategy predicts if you're gonna help somebody with physical disabilities. So it's simple, it's embarrassing, but it's super powerful. So how did I get here? How did I get to figuring out that this silly little game would be so diagnostic and predictive of how good a dog might be at succeeding in training to be a working dog in the various jobs that dogs do? So it's a problem we've been working on, which is you've got these puppies, they're gorgeous, and just like freshman undergraduates at TLU coming in, you see them, they're so cute. What are they going to be when they grow up? They could be anything. And the question is, which ones of them are going to be good at what job? And so then you go and you interact with all the professors and you take all the different classes, and then you major in something and not in the other thing, and then you go out in the world and hopefully you're successful. The thing is your passion. But the question is, how do we do that with dogs? When we see these little puppies, these little freshman dogs coming in a working dog population, how do we identify the dogs that are going to be super good at helping people and those that aren't? We know that only about half across the different groups that train dogs to help people, whether it's for detecting bombs or helping people with disabilities, it's generally about half of the dogs that make it through the training programs. Imagine if we could figure out at this young age which dogs were the ones that were going to make it. We could concentrate our effort and energy and resources on those dogs. So here we have these guys, they grow up and they could be different things. They could be pets, they could help the military, they could help people at home, people with disabilities, etc. So which of the dogs are going to end up being best at doing the different jobs? It's a question I've been really fascinated by, but I took a different approach than maybe many people might take. And you heard Debbie introduce that I'm in an evolutionary anthropology department. I'm in a department focused on human evolution. Why is the Duke Canine Cognition Center one of the first centers focused on completely focused on how dog psychology operates in a department focused on human evolution. That doesn't make any sense. Well, it's because we had success and we arrived at that silly little game that I showed you at the beginning because we took an evolutionary approach. I get called all the time by reporters, and this is the median question I receive. Almost every other call I receive from a reporter, they're going to ask me something about which is the smart species. Is it this species or this species? Just tell me which species is the smart one. And they want the clickbait, and what they really, really want, because they're always driving a cat versus dog, of course, solve the age-old battle. And they want me to say, they want, Brian Hare, Duke University, Duke Canine Cognition Center to say, cats are dumb and dogs are smart. Hang in there, buddy. That's what they're looking for, is for me to say, cats are dumb and dogs are smart, and they got their clickbait, and they're going to have 1 million people read their article, and their editor's going to be really happy. And I drive them crazy, unfortunately, because I always say to them, thinking about this array of animals I'm going to talk to you about for a minute, I always respond to them when they say which species is smarter, a chimp or a dolphin or a cat or a dog. I always say to them, well, if you can answer my question, I'll answer yours. Which is a better tool, a hammer or a screwdriver? Because when you ask me which species is smarter, it's exactly the same as if I asked you, is a hammer better than a screwdriver? Well, what problem are we trying to solve? Just like we design our tools to solve certain problems, evolution has designed animals to solve certain problems. And the cognitive approach predicts that animals will have the most cognitive flexibility, sophistication, solving the problems that they must solve in order to survive and reproduce and be successful. Every species up here is a genius. They each have their own genius. Just like a hammer is an amazing tool for hammering, and a screwdriver is amazing if you need to put a screw into the wall, but they're not good at the other thing. Just as those tools are good at things and bad at things, each of these species is genius at something, but not so good at other things. So you may not believe me that some of these species are genius, but each one of them has a genius. So for instance, this is the one, this bird up here makes me feel terrible about myself. It's a Clark's nutcracker. They can remember up to 10,000 locations where they've cached food in the summer, and 6 to 8 months later in the winter, they can find all of these things they've cached, but of course it's under snow because they live in the Rocky Mountains, and they have no visual cues from where they originally hid it to find the food. I can't even find my stupid keys, and these birds can remember where thousands of pieces of food have been hidden. Another example are the grouper here. They actually work with eels to they have a signal they can make to ask eels to help them hunt. So they will signal to a moray eel. The eel will come out of the reef. They'll swim to where the grouper wants them to go. They swim into the reef that the grouper obviously is too big to swim into. All the fish that are terrified of the moray eel swim out. The grouper snaps them up because they're big and powerful. And then the eel can get all the remnants of their cooperative effort. That's pretty genius. So let's take chimpanzees and dolphins as another example. So when people challenge me, they say, yeah, but obviously there's got to be a continuum. There's got to be, some species are smarter than others. And human psychologists especially will say this, and I'll say, well, how did you do on your echolocation test? Because I bet you did about like how I did. So literally, dolphins have a completely, unknown set of cognitive abilities that we do not possess. They have a different type of intelligence that we couldn't even imagine what it would be like to have. So of course there are different types of intelligence, and they vary independently, and species have evolved these different abilities for their success. So what about this middle species? I want to argue to you that these guys are also genius. And if you take an evolutionary perspective, the question becomes, how did a feared predator turn into this animal that we often have in our bed now. And I think the genius of dogs, of course, is that we love them. And they are amazing at getting us to love them. I could say manipulating us to love them, depending on what you prefer. All right. So taking an evolutionary approach, what that means is that I really have to think hard about how did a species evolve? When did it evolve? Who are its closest relatives? And the most important thing is I'm always wondering about compared to what? Compared to what? When I say my dog is smart, my dog isn't smart, compared to what? So if we want to talk about or identify the thing that might be special about dogs, we need to do some comparisons. So the comparison that we stumbled upon, actually, by accident, was thinking about the fact that children, all of us actually, when we were somewhere between the age of 6 to 12 months, we had a revolution in our understanding of our world. It was no longer that we were by ourselves and we were sort of interacting with things that moved and, learning about the properties of the world, and seeing other humans as if they were other objects. All of a sudden, 6 to 9 to 12 months, there's a revolution where you start to realize there are other humans and they're like me and I can learn from them and I can look where they look and if I do that, I see fascinating things and they point. And if I follow the direction of their point, I see things that I want, or I want them to get for me. If you've had kids, you understand what I mean. And this revolution in the ability to read and to produce gestures, to communicate what we want, or understand what somebody else desires, is a total game changer. And it's thought that upon these abilities are built all of our cultural cognition, all our ability to learn language, all of our ability to learn from the many generations that have gone before us, and then innovate and improve the things that we inherit, whether it's an artifact or knowledge, etc. So developmental psychologists had been studying how kids learn to use gestures and been comparing them to other great apes, chimpanzees and bonobos, our closest living relatives. And so what I'm going to show you is a video where we actually compared kids, bonobos. We have two closest relatives, bonobos and chimpanzees. We compared kids, a bonobo, and a dog for this ability that's so important in beginning to understand your social world in a way that allows children to begin to acquire culture and language.
He's talking about what researchers call social inference, a capability humans, like Hare's son Luke, acquire around age 1. To demonstrate
That's
the concept,
That's
Hare
Anderson.
hides a ball under one of these two cups.
Hey, looky guy, where is it? Can you get it? Can you get the ball?
Luke doesn't know which cup the ball is under,
Can you get it?
but when his father points, he makes an inference.
That's my boy.
You got it.
So what does that show you?
So when kids his age start understanding pointing, it's right when the foundations of what lead to language and culture start to develop. Hey,
It might look simple, but when Hare tried the same test with bonobos, great apes he studied for more than a decade, look what happened. Bonobos, our closest genetic relatives, can't do it.
you chose the wrong one.
But Hare discovered dogs can.
You ready? All right, I'm going to hide in one of these two places.
This 2-year-old Labrador named Sisu has no trouble understanding the meaning of pointing.
Now, she doesn't know for sure which place you put
That's
it.
right. There's no way she could know, and I'm just going to tell her where it is. Okay, Sisu. Okay, so I would forgive you if, like many, you would have suspected that these two species that look more similar are genetically really closely related. They're going to be more similar cognitively in everything you could probably think of. But that's not what we ended up observing. In many ways, chimpanzees and bonobos can run circles around dogs cognitively. It's totally true. But in this one place that's really, really important to becoming humans, this ability to cooperatively communicate, to understand that, oh, you're trying to help me and communicate what you want, or you're trying to understand what it is that I want and what I'm trying to communicate, dogs seem to be special. So if these circles sort of represent skill, or the amount of skill, and the more circle, the more skillful you are, it ends up that dogs are more similar to children than our closest living relatives in this one special place. So that was kind of a surprise. Now, you're all good experimentalists, I'm sure, and I should stop to cover one thing that I'm sure you're wondering and thinking, which is, wait a second, the dog smelled the food. Duh. Because we take an experimental approach, we do run all sorts of controls. So can anybody think of the control you would run here if you wanted to rule out that Sisu, the dog that followed my point, was just actually smelling where the food was? Anybody want to volunteer an idea what you would do? Rub food inside of the other cup. That's not a bad idea. Anybody else? Point the one without food, yes. Put it behind them. Okay, good. Anybody else? Those are all good ideas. So there's many different controls that you can run, and actually, in all of those cases, I think probably people have done it. And what you find over and over and over again is that if you control for olfaction, dogs are preferentially prioritizing the visual information over olfactory information. And they choose at chance if you look at the first choice they make. If you let them go and they can just run around, they'll eventually knock over the cup with the food, of course. But what we're interested in is their first choice. When you say, okay, go get it, do they go left or do they go right? And if they go immediately to where the food is, that's a correct choice. All right, so given that we find this remarkable ability to cooperate and communicate in dogs, which I'm going to argue is really their genius and the thing that makes them different from many other species, and my interest in evolution, I couldn't help but want to understand the origin of their cooperative communicative ability. How could it be that a distant relative in the mammal order, or in the so distantly related to us, is more similar to us than another member of the primate order? So the first thing that has to cross your mind is, well, of course it must just be that they hang out with people, they practice, people gesture to them all the time, and most of the dogs that we studied initially were all adults. So it's probably they just have a ton of experience with us, and they just slowly learn this and get good at it. And that's actually what we thought probably was the answer. But we went and looked at very young puppies, puppies that had different amounts of interaction with humans, and some puppies that actually hadn't even been adopted into a human family yet. And we looked at puppies as young as 8 to 9 weeks old. Subsequently, researchers have looked at puppies that are 5 and 6 weeks old. And what you find, which is quite remarkable, is that young dog puppies are really good at this as soon as you begin to test them. The first few weeks of life, they're already following human gestures. It was a big shock. It's like they're prepared to figure out what it is that we want. It's not something that takes a lot of exposure to us to develop. It's not that practicing doesn't help. It's just that it's not required to get it started. And it's not that certain dogs are really remarkable when they're young and others aren't. We've seen it in almost every dog that we've looked at, regardless of what breed or how they're kept, etc. So I also studied wolves, and this is a picture of me at the Wildlife Science Center in Minnesota, and I'm with a group of young wolves. These are between 5 and 6 months old at this point. And we've been playing the same cooperative community of games with these young wolves. Now, what you'll notice is the wolves are not near me. And I've actually been sitting in the enclosure for about an hour when this picture was made, and there's a ton of food all over the ground here being used to attract these wolves to come closer to me. And so when we tested wolves, not only did we see that they were more like chimpanzees when it comes to reading our gestures, but they don't even want to be around us. They're not interested in us. And these are wolves that have actually been raised by people. Even the people that raise them, when you start gesturing to them, they don't follow the gestures reliably. So that led us to believe that perhaps this is something that is a product of domestication. It's not that it takes a long time for it to develop. And it doesn't look like wolves are doing the same thing. They're not motivated, they're not interested, they're not attracted to people. And when they do follow our gestures, they do it at a relatively low rate. And if you, much like a great ape, you can get a bonobo or a chimpanzee to use our gestures, but you have to practice with them a lot, and practice, and then they can eventually do it. And that's what you see with the wolves, that there are some wolves that eventually do read human gestures, but you really have to work with them to get them to do it. Okay, so that rules out that the ability that we're talking about is just inherited from wolves, and it rules out that this is something that's a developmental story where it's about practice. So doesn't that mean it's domestication? Well, not necessarily, because you would have to domesticate some wolves and see if your domestication actually causes the origin or causes these abilities, this cooperative communicative skill set, to appear again. Well, I don't have time to domesticate wolves. I don't know about you. Trying to convince somebody to fund that would be difficult. So how in the world am I ever, it's like a dead end. But luckily I was able to travel to Siberia, where there was a population of foxes that had been selected to be friendly to people for over 40 years by the time I arrived. And they had a control line. The control line was selected randomly for how it behaved towards people. And not only did the foxes that were selected to be friendly love to be with people, jump into your arms, wag their tail, cry for joy when they were in your arms, and also sometimes pee for joy, which was unfortunate because they have musk glands, and then you smelled like fox musk for the rest of the day. Not only did they do all that, but they had a high frequency compared to the control foxes of curly tails, piebald coats. They had shorter muzzles, so their noses and mouth got shorter. Their teeth are crowded, and their canines, their sharp canine teeth, are shorter. These are all traits. Oh, and they have a higher prevalence of floppy ears. These are all traits that are associated with domestication in domesticated species. So the selecting an animal to be friendly actually drags along a lot of the traits by accident that we think of when we think of domesticated animals. So when you select for friendliness, so the story goes, you end up domesticating an animal. Or at least you initiate domestication. You get the first part of domestication done. So then, think about dogs. One of the interesting things that's been revealed about dog evolution from genomic comparisons is that dogs were domesticated 25 to 40,000 years ago. Now, how many crops had been sowed 25 to 40,000 years ago on planet Earth by human beings? How many farms were there? They were exactly 0. So the people who were interacting with wolves that led to domestication and the first proto-dogs and eventually dog domestication were not farmers. They were not agriculturalists. They were foragers. They were hunter-gatherers. And so the thinking is that as human populations were expanding, as people started to live at higher densities around 25 to 40,000 years, and all the other species of humans went extinct, there was a moment where humans were doing something that we do better than any other species, but at this time we were doing it in a new and unusually productive way. We were creating garbage in the, whether it was latrines, so fecal matter, and also the discarded meals from the day before. And if you're a wolf and you have the choice of, okay, I'm going to run after food, and you all have seen all the Discovery Channel movies where you don't know who to root for. Do I root for the hungry wolf with the starving pups, or the running away elk and the baby elk that is trying to protect? I never know who to root for, right? So do I root for, you're the wolf and you're like, I don't know, do I chase the elk and get kicked in the face and maybe I don't get fed because it's like 10% of the time I might be successful? Or do I sneak in at night and I'm attracted to all this garbage and fecal matter that all these humans are producing now that they're more sedentary and living at a higher density? And let's just talk about human feces for a moment. It has the protein content of chicken. It's cooked. It's digested. it doesn't run away, it doesn't bite, and it doesn't kick. And you know where it is every day. It is like an energy bar for a wolf. So one of the ideas about how dogs happened is they were attracted to our garbage, they were attracted to our feces. And in fact, there's a new study that was just published this year, and I cannot imagine the graduate student who was told this was what their PhD would be. But there was a graduate student who followed a pack of village dogs in Botswana around from dawn to dusk, watching and coding everything they ate, and a quarter of their diet was human feces. And that's why I know that the protein content of human feces is equivalent to chicken, because they collected some of the feces and they analyzed the protein content because they were puzzled as to why the dogs were so attracted to it. So it ends up that a big part of what may have driven dog domestication is the easy availability of calories that humans were producing as we became so successful as the top predator in Eurasia and entered the space where wolves were. And some wolves decided that, you know what, this could be a lot easier. This could be a better way to do things. Now, they didn't obviously intentionally do that, but those that were able to be friendly approach were going to be more successful, have more offspring. And I think they probably made a pretty good decision, because sadly, there are not many wolves left. They're highly endangered, sadly, and there are dogs everywhere. There's millions of them. So the group of wolves that went one way towards humans really made a great decision evolutionarily, and it's what, you know, their genius is. They made a pact with us. So that's the idea for the genius of dogs and how it happened and how dog evolution was kick-started by individual wolves who were slightly friendlier, able to use human resources in a way that other wolves may not have been able to do, and it put them at an adaptive advantage. All right, so this story and some of the work I've described to you got a lot of people really excited about dog psychology. And it wasn't just me, it was other people working on this as well. But the exciting thing is that if you are into dog cognition, this is your moment. Because now there are more dog centers in the United States than ever before, and there are more people getting involved, and many of the people up here are going to be speaking to you tomorrow. So it is a really exciting moment, and this is my pitch for your university. What about the TLU Canine Cognition Center? And you'll see as I go forward that this is not a hard thing to do logistically. It's equivalent to what developmental psychologists do all the time. We just test four-legged children instead of two-legged children. All right. So because so many people got excited about the idea that there may be this genius in dogs, dogs have a genius. People got excited. Wow, what other things did they do? A lot of people designed a lot of different cognitive games, and I want to show you one to bring us back down to earth. So this is a game that we played with service dogs, and it tests their physical reasoning. So physical reasoning, unlike social reasoning, is how you understand physical properties of the world, like solid objects don't pass through each other, that when things are connected, they act together, that gravity pulls things down, not sideways, etc. And so the question is, how well do different animals understand the causal properties of the world? And specifically, what do dogs understand? All right, so here's a game we played with dogs. And luckily, the example I have here, the dog gets it right. But I can tell you the story is a bit depressing. This is not something that dogs are particularly good at. But let me just show you the game first. All right. So in that red bucket is a toy and a treat. And all you got to do is figure out where the bucket is. All right, you've never seen this before, so see if you can figure it out. Where's the bucket hidden?
Okay.
Where is it? Okay, that dog got it. Thank goodness. But what I'll tell you is that it ends up that dogs really are horrible at that problem. If you play that problem with your dog at home, you will be really depressed. It's amazing. You hide a bucket under a little towel and they're totally flummoxed. So most dogs fail miserably. They either guess or they actually go to the wrong place, to the flat carpet on the ground. That's where the bucket is. It's going to find it in there. All right, so what happened was that we've created, a lot of people got excited about dog cognition, and a lot of games like this one, some they're really bad at and some that they're really good at, like the ones that demonstrate their genius, and many other games too that explore other types of problem solving were created. And we got really interested in, okay, let's look at a whole bunch of these games and let's compare kids and dogs and chimpanzees on all of them. So we had hundreds of individuals from each species participate, and we threw kind of the cognitive kitchen sink at them. Each of these circles kind of represent one of these games, and we wanted to know if we compare chimps, kids, and dogs to each other, what's it going to look like on these different measures of cognitive ability? And here's what we found for the dogs. Dogs are pretty good at the communication stuff. When it comes to causal reasoning, don't ask them about physics homework. And their memory's, I mean, it's okay. They've got okay memory. But relative to what? Compared to what? So let's compare dogs to other species, and this is what it looks like. So this was sort of the best data we had with the largest set of games and the largest set of subjects to really make the argument that it really is the case that dogs have a genius for this communicative skill that I've been talking about. Because look, when you have communication, they're doing really well on the games where they have to understand us, and our closest chimp relatives, bonobo relatives, really struggle with these games. Causality, yikes. Kids and other apes look more similar. And memory, they're not so special on memory. But really, relative to these species, it really is their communicative ability that's their genius. Okay, so I promised you in the very beginning that I was going to tell you how this evolutionary approach led to that silly little game. And the thinking was the following, that gosh, if we can test all these different species and compare their abilities on all these different cognitive games, why can't we test different populations of dogs? And given the unique genius that dogs have to cooperate and communicate, maybe these cooperative communicative games are really important for working dogs. Nobody had actually really looked at whether individual differences in performance on these communicative games mapped onto the success of dogs in training programs. And we thought, let's just put all those games in there too, all the other ones too. So we worked with Canine Companions for Independence. They're headquartered in Santa Rosa. They have 5 campuses all over the country, including one here in Texas. And we worked with the Office of Naval Research, who funded our work to study Marine Corps dogs that were working with or were being trained and cared for by K2 Solutions, a contractor in Pinehurst, North Carolina. So let's talk about IDD dogs. These are improvised explosive detector dogs. I was at a conference with a Marine Corps general where we were trying to argue that maybe we should take a cognitive approach to helping them identify the best bomb detecting dogs, because we had just figured out what the genius of dogs might be. And maybe if we use that realization, we might see something we hadn't seen before. And his response was, son, the dog's nose is a detection device. They're a sensor, and they need to sense the bomb. We just want to know what makes their sensor good or their sensor bad. So I thought, oh man, this is a steep curve. All right, I don't know how I'm going to do with this. And I wasn't going to argue with the Marine Corps general, so I was like, yes, sir. So, but here's what I presented when I got up, which is when dogs are trying to find bombs, it may not be as simple as you think. It may not just be about being a sensor. You need to use your social cognition. So you need to follow the verbal commands of your handler. You've got to follow the gestures if they send you out, cast you out to search for bombs. You've got to understand physical cognition. You've got to navigate the space that you're in. You've got to take detours in your environment. You've got to balance your visual or olfactory information that you're receiving, not to mention the other senses. You've got to maintain your performance when you're in a stressful environment. Maybe there's a bomb that goes off or other traumatic events, but you've still got to stay motivated. You've got to have self-control. You've got to persist when, giving up is a lot easier. And you've got to suppress inappropriate behavior. Like, it'd be more fun to chase the goat than search for bombs. And you've also got to remember. You've got to remember what you're searching for. You've got to remember where you've been. And you've got to represent the target that you're after, whatever it is that you're trying to smell. So the suggestion here is that actually finding a bomb is a intensely rich cognitive problem, and it's not just about do you have enough olfactory cells in your nose. It really does recruit a lot of the cognitive abilities that dogs have to solve problems. So this is my slide, my extreme version of an animal that is a sensor. Because if you were just looking for an animal that had an amazing nose and was a sensor, you would never choose a dog. You would obviously choose a star-nosed mole. If you've ever seen the olfactory bulb of a star-nosed mole, you would know what I mean. Their brain is about 2/3 olfactory bulb. That's the part of the brain that allows you to discriminate different scents. Their entire brain is dedicated to this nose hand thing they have because they're blind and they have to find worms, etc. This is an organism that is genius at smelling. Are dogs genius at smelling? Compared to what? Well, compared to a star-nosed mole, they're pretty average probably for most mammals. So hypothesis is that actually being a successful detector dog is about more than just having a good nose. Otherwise, we'd be working with animals like this. All right, so our goal was, could we use our cognitive games to predict or at least find associations between things that happen in the real world? So you've got the warfighter, they've got their dog, and can we predict that this dog is the dog that's going to chase the goat instead of chasing bombs based on some laboratory tests where we're hiding something and there's a problem they have to solve? The advantage of the approach that we use is that the games are spontaneous measures. There's no training involved. You just rock up and you give the animal, whatever animal it is, 5, 10 experiences with this, and you've got your data. You're not trying to train them to do anything. You're trying to see what they understand about the world. You're trying to see what they know when they walk into the classroom, not after the end of the school year, test them and see what they learned. Okay. So, same for assistance dogs. Is it that we can play these kind of funny games that seem kind of weird and maybe even artificial? And will they tell us anything about a dog that's going to behave well or a dog that may have some problem behaviors and struggle to really help someone with disabilities? So we did the same thing that we did comparing the different species. We compared the different populations of dogs. We compared a group of Marine Corps dogs at K2 Solutions. We compared a bunch of family dogs, and the family dogs were at the Duke Canine Cognition Center. And how it works is just like developmental psychology. We call people who have registered on our database. They want to bring their dogs in, and we say, hey, you want to bring your dog in at XYZ time to do this study? And 99% of the time, people say, please, when? And they show up early, and then they want to stay later, and they say, when can they come back again? And so we have had amazing success at getting people to come to Duke and have their pet dogs participate in research. And so we had 100 of those dogs that played a set of games that these guys played, and we also played it with 100 assistance dogs. Now, these dogs and these dogs, we tested before they went into training for their jobs. And the idea was, could we not only associate some of their cognitive performances, but could we use their performance on the games we tested them before training and predict who was going to pass and who was going to fail? And here's what we found when we compared these different populations. So, same idea, the circles are sort of skill level on these different measures. Noticed self-control has replaced causality. Just forget about causality with dogs. It's hopeless. All right. So it's really an interesting pattern. So the first thing you see is the assistance dogs look really different than the pet dogs when it comes to their self-control and when it comes to their communicative ability. The successful dogs, the ones that are successful at passing the training programs and go to be placed with somebody else, are ones that are especially good at cooperative communication, the genius of dogs, and are really high in self-control. For the IED dogs, it's also important to be really good at cooperative communication relative to your average pet dog. But look at self-control. If you have this kind of self-control and you're looking for bombs, you're going to fail the program. And if you have this kind of self-control and you're going to be an assistant program dog, you're going to fail the program. So you might want to characterize this as trying to find the smart dog, but that's actually not what we're doing. Just like the media reporter who calls me and says which species is smarter, you might call me and say which type of dog is smarter. And I would tell you, no, that's not what you're interested in. What you want to know is what are the skills that dog needs to do that job well. And that's what we've tried to figure out. And it seems that if you are going to be a detector dog, you actually want to be totally uninhibited because you're going to be running around like crazy. So I'll tell you one story. It was pretty funny. I get this email one day, Dr. Hare, we've bought a bunch of bike helmets. These are my students. I'm like, what? You bought bike helmets? Why'd you buy bike helmets? They're down in Pinehurst testing the K2 dogs that are going to go out with the Marines. They said, well, we had to buy bike helmets because when we were doing the detour game where the dogs are supposed to go around the barrier, well, they just kept running through it. And when they ran through it again and again and again, they kept knocking us over and hitting us in the head. And so we had to buy helmets because we were going to get injured. So literally, a good detector dog is a jarhead dog and goes right through the wall. And interestingly enough, one of the tests that was really important in discriminating between these two groups was that first test I showed you of the food in the box. If you respond by asking for help, I hope you're in a assistance dog program. If you respond by, I'm going to do this myself, I hope you're in a detector dog program. Because if you have the opposite response, let's say you're trying to ask for help and you're in this program, you're almost certainly going to fail out. And vice versa here. So it's not really about who's smart or not, it's who has the right skills, the right motivation to do these different jobs. So this is just some data of that original test, the impossible task, and this is the dogs that are in Canine Companions for Independence, and the ones that are released and fail out of the program, really try to solve the problem on their own, are more likely, and then these guys that make more eye contact are much more likely to pass. This is data from the embarrassing causality task, and this is just showing that actually failing this game is associated with success in training. The dogs that are released from the program here, and these are different cohorts of dogs, the dogs that are released from the program are the ones that did the best on this problem. Failing the task was good. And we don't care because we're just trying to figure out and predict who's going to make it through training. All right, and this is data from the working dogs, the detector dogs, and it's the same story. These were tests that were predictive of success in training, and then this one, they were had the opposite response because this is actually the impossible task of what we coded as a correct response, but it was very predictive, so that's good. All right, so if you put these two kinds of dogs against each other, you get really different profiles of what you're looking for in their cognition if you want them to be successful. And here's one of the really fun things. They're all Labrador retrievers. All of them. So, in some places you want them to be the same, in some places you want them to have opposite skill sets, and then some skill sets you need sort of uniquely depending on the job that you're doing. So they have different cognitive profiles. It's not that one's smarter than the other, it's they have different profiles that allow them to be successful. All right, so citizen science, something you can do. So Dognition basically asks the question, could we answer questions that we haven't been able to answer by getting everybody excited, like has happened at Duke, where everybody brings their dog in to play games at Duke? If we just put that experience online, maybe just everybody in the world could do it. Why are we hogging this in the Triangle in North Carolina? Why don't we give everybody the opportunity to do it? And so how it works is that you can go on the website, and we teach you how to play some of the games we designed at Duke, some of the ones that I've been talking about with you this whole time. You can play them with your dog at home. You tell us what your dog does. We prompt you, and you enter the data online. And then your dog is compared to all the other dogs in our database. So compared to what? every time I have a dog talk, people, even though I present what cognition is, people come up to me, or maybe in the QAs, people ask me, well, they'll say, oh, my dog is so smart, or oh, my dog is so not smart. And I can already tell you what my answer is. Compared to what? And I think the right comparison is relative to other dogs. So we have data from over 30,000 dogs all over the world. We've just started to analyze the data. And the first thing we found is people are pretty good at this. I thought it was going to be a really interesting educational experience. I didn't think the data was going to be very useful. I have seen people do Cognition, and they don't necessarily do it in the way that I would let them get away with it at Duke if they were my student. People, sort of are a little bit, artist license, I guess, when they do the games. Some of the instructions are kind of complicated, I guess. But what we found when we analyzed the citizen science data relative to laboratory data is all the same phenomena are there. All the things I've already described to you that we discovered at Duke, you can see in the citizen science data. So it seems that it's a pretty good way to validly measure dog psychology. And everybody's always really worried when they're doing it at home, oh, I'm not doing it right, I'm messing it up, I'm going to ruin the data set, blah, blah, blah. It's true, those are reasonable worries, except we have so much data, because we have 30,000 people, the noise is washed out by the signal. And the signal's strong enough that we can pick it up. Okay, so we also find beautiful evidence in this really big data set that dogs have different types of intelligence. They don't just have one type of intelligence. These 5 different types of intelligence vary independently. So if you're doing something remarkable relative to other dogs in terms of the empathy games, it doesn't mean that you'll do something remarkable in the memory games, and we could go on and on. All right. Now this is a really fun one. Stanley Coren published a paper where he asked different trainers, what are the top 3 most obedient breeds, and what are the least obedient breeds? And there's a list of hundreds of breeds, and it's become sort of, you can Google it right now, and I'm sure it'll come up, and it is sort of the intelligence list of dog breeds. So we have data from thousands of dogs, not from trainers, but the dogs playing games. And not just one game, 10 different cognitive games, and so now we can play that game. And I can ask you now not what is the most obedient breed and get your opinion, your subjective opinion, and make a list. I can ask you, what breed of dog do you think makes the most eye contact? So, which breed of dog would you guess makes the least amount of eye contact? We've got about 75 breeds in our database we can look at. There are at least 50 dogs per breed if we do this analysis. What do you think? Least amount of eye contact, most amount of eye contact? Just yell it out. Doesn't matter, just guess. Border Collies make the most eye contact? Sorry? You can be loud. This is your chance to be loud. What was it? Golden Retriever? Chihuahua. Okay, I thought I heard wallaby. I'm pretty sure they didn't say wallaby. Okay. What'd you say over here? Chihuahua. That's right. Okay. Boxers. There's a boxer fan in the crowd. Okay, so bottom 3 breeds, Akita, Shiba Inu, Greyhound. 31 to 36 seconds of eye contact before they break eye contact. Top 3, Springer, Cocker, and Water Spaniel. All right, arm pointing. Which breed is the best at following gestural communication? Give me your bottom 3 breeds. Labs. Bulldogs. Basset Hounds. Chihuahuas. What am I, in Texas? There's like a thing about Chihuahuas? I don't know. All right, what are they? Shiba Inu, Greyhound, Staffy Terrier. All right, top 3. Bernese Mountain Dog, Parsons Russell Terrier, Springer Spaniel. How many people were thinking Bernese Mountain Dog, champion at following gestures? All right. Last one. You guys ready for this? Come on, I know you're going to get one right. Bottom 3. Shiba Inu. I like that. Good, good, good. Shiba Inu. All right. Greyhound. What? Mastiff. Chihuahua. All right. And the answer is All right, one more chance, guys. Champion of memory. Remembers you. Remembers what you gave them. Remembers your love. Number one. Come on, top three. Who is it? All right, that was good. I like that. That got a lot of help. All right, here it is. All right, so I think what the take home is, we have a lot of strong ideas and opinions about which dogs may be good at what. And if you actually have data, you can evaluate those ideas. And it ends up sometimes where we don't actually know what we thought we knew. And the most important thing is that there's no dog that's in the top three the whole time. And in fact, we've got two more types of intelligence I could have listed. I just ran out of space on the slide. And I can tell you that none of those top three make it. And none of the bottom make it all the way across. It's different breeds on all the different measures. All right. So, new paper we just published, last data, and then I'm going to wrap up and tell you a little bit about the future, and then we'll open up for questions. So this is a paper we just published a few weeks ago using the Cognition data. So remember, there's 5 types of intelligence we measure with Cognition data. I have blanked out part of the title. Absolute brain size, which means how big a dog's brain is, because it ends up that a Chihuahua, let's say, its brain might be slightly smaller than a Great Dane's brain. I'm not trying to offend anybody, that's just a fact. Brain size scales to body size, and so different dogs have different absolute brain sizes. Well, we had found between different species that brain size is related to different types of cognitive performance. So we thought, well, let's look within dogs. We've got this amazing database. No one's ever done this. Let's do it. So my question for you is, absolute brain size predicts dog breed differences in blank function. Is it this? Raise your hand. Empathy. Is it communication? Heck yeah, somebody said. All right. Is it cunning? That means their ability to understand what it is, what you can see and what you can't see, and inhibiting disobeying you. Okay, so what about that? Cunning? Nobody. No, not that. Okay, what about memory? I need hands, folks, hands. Come on. This is voting. You have voting. All right. All right, and reasoning. So this is making an inference about something. Okay. All right. So you ready to find out what we found? So it was executive function. Executive function was embedded in these 2 measures. So self-control, one of the games is you put food down and tell the dog not to take it, and you watch them. And you say, don't take the food. And then you just click a timer on Cognition, the Cognition timer, and then you just see how long it is before the dog breaks down and says, whatever, I'm taking the food. Okay? So it ends up that larger dogs are much better at resisting the temptation from taking the food than smaller brain dogs. And memory, the memory game is you hide food in 1 of 2 places. They don't know where you hide food in 1 of 2 places, but you actually show them where you hide it, but then you close their eyes, and they have to wait for 90 to 120 seconds, which is actually a pretty long time for an animal. And then they get to find the food. All right. So it ends up that the size of the dog's brain is related to performance. Now, here's what's interesting is I just gave you a talk, and I told you that finding bombs is related to memory. Using your olfactory abilities to find things is related to memory, and I'm telling you now that in the world's largest data set, that brain size is related to your memory function. Isn't that interesting? I wonder if these are related to olfactory performance. We don't know yet, but that would be a prediction of this data that we didn't know before. All right, so does this mean that bigger dogs are smarter than small dogs? Isn't that the conclusion, folks? We always knew that small dogs weren't smart. The guy stood up and said it. Now there's a paper or something. That's what I'm going to remember. I'm going to go tell all my friends. Big dogs are smarter. The Chihuahua people are like, no, I don't believe the study. All right, don't worry. Remember, it's not about are they smarter, it's what are they smarter in. And remember, there were all those other measures. So what did we find about those? Well, it ends up that small dogs were better at cunning, at being cunning, And instead of just looking at if you tell them not to take something, and could they resist not taking it, which is what the big dogs did, they just sat there and were like, I shouldn't take it. I really shouldn't. He told me not to. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stay here till he tells me. The small dogs were faster to give up and actually take the food, but we had two different conditions. In one condition, if the dog's there, you would put it and you were watching them, but the other condition, you turned your back. And it ends up that the small dogs were way better at going and getting the food immediately when you turn your back. Whereas the big dogs that had much more self-control were going, he told me not to, he told me not to. He's got his back there, but he told me not to. So, which dog is smarter? Well, it just depends on the measure. So small dogs are really, really good at using your line of sight and trying to figure out when they could take advantage or, not let you know they're being disobedient. So for the future, I'm really interested in rearing experiences. Believe it or not, there's a dearth of work on how we raise our dogs. And just like there are religions about how children should be raised, there are as strong and powerful religions about how dogs should be reared. And I think it'd be really fun to actually do some science and see if we could measure and compare the ways that dogs are reared and not get tied up in knots about, how we feel they should be reared, but let's just measure and figure out what's the best way to do it for what we're rearing them for. So working with Canine Companions for Independence, they're actually letting us host up to 10 puppies at a time on Duke's campus. And Duke undergraduates are raising the dogs. We're even considering having them have them in the dorms. I don't know how that's going to go. We're going to see. But they may have puppies in the dorm. And we've built a kindergarten where there's an outdoor play area, and we have an indoor room where they can go to kindergarten during the day while people are in classes and stuff like that. And then we can give them different experiences. We can measure their cognitive abilities as they grow in great detail. And we're going to be able to test a bunch of really interesting things. For instance, if you have just one person and one family sort of as your bonded, loving person as you're growing up as a future assistance dog versus you're peer-reared with other puppies, and instead of having one person giving you all that love, you've got lots of people giving you all that love. What does that do? Does that have a positive or a negative effect? Or maybe there are different effects that are positive and negative. Also, using different training models. What happens if early in life, when you're a puppy, instead of everything being the human training you, what if we have some adult service dogs who have some of the successful or have succeeded in training and can demonstrate some of their abilities to the young puppies? Maybe the puppies don't even do it when they're young. They're just in the room while the adult dog is doing it. Is it that later when they're trained, they learn it faster just because they were in the room while this adult dog was doing this every day, a few times a day? Nobody's ever tested that. Sleep. Sleeping by yourself. Everybody knows about today that you should have your dog in a crate. Should you have your dog in a crate? Maybe puppies should be sleeping in groups. No one's actually ever measured it. And we're really interested in also doing some metabolic research as well. Okay, so I hope that you enjoyed a little bit of a tour, and I thank you for your attention. Learning about the fact that dogs have different types of cognitive abilities, they vary independently, they do have a genius, just like every other species, and that taking an evolutionary approach was what led us to figure out how we could identify dogs that were going to be most likely to succeed, and also map out the different types of cognition that are related to different types of jobs that dogs are doing. So thank you very much. So I've been told two things, which is that if you want to ask a question, come to the microphone, and then I'm supposed to repeat the question. But if you go to the microphone, I won't have to. Yes, ma'am.
So how long before the results of the research you were just talking about will be, and how can we follow that?
The rearing research?
Yes.
Well, there's good news and bad news there. The good news is that we just got funding from the National Institute of Health to do it. So we have a nice amount of funding for the next 5 years to work on this. The bad news is that we have 5 years of funding, to work on this, and it'll be years before we can say anything because unlike citizen science, where in a weekend we could get more data than anybody's ever had before if everybody just went home and collected the data, with puppies, they have to grow up, and there's only so many you can have, and so it's going to be slow going. But stay tuned.
Question, but I really don't know how to kind of ask it. When you're talking about the dogs using all of their senses and the size of their brain and everything.
Yes.
Well, if they lose 2 of those senses, never had them to begin with.
Okay.
Would that mean that their brain in those sections with the compartments would just be smaller because they're not used? And then where they do use the other senses, that they would be larger because they utilize them more?
So that's an interesting question. So is it that sort of if you...
Oh, he can't hear you or see you. He's blind and deaf,
All right, well, you'll have to hug him for me.
but he's very smart.
Yeah, I believe it, I believe it. So the question really is about what is the impact of using your brain, and does sort of, like a muscle, if you exercise your brain, does it sort of grow your brain and strengthen your brain, sort of like a muscle? And there's tremendous debate about that, and there are examples in animals where it is absolutely the case that exercising the brain, as it were, can have a big impact. So for instance, remember the bird, the Clark's nutcracker, that can remember all the locations? Well, those birds, if they are allowed to hide things, a part of their brain that allows for those memories gets bigger. So that would support your idea that, oh, maybe there are different parts of the brain that get bigger for specific things. But that's actually one of the only examples that people have been able to generate. And so my guess is that it is really not, for instance, what's your dog's name?
Braille?
Rail. Okay, so my guess is that Rail has fully...
No, Braille.
Braille, sorry. Yeah, Braille, like the language. So Braille, who's adorable, I'm sure he has fully functioning cognition, and that if he could hear or see, and if we could have a different way for him to perceive the problems, I'm sure he would do just as well as other dogs using his other perceptual abilities.
Well, it's like he can meet somebody once and he remembers them. And I know it's from their scent.
Right.
He picks up on them. He goes to Morgan's Wonderland all the time. He's always around with children. He rides the rides with them. I don't help him get on the rides. He figures it out. He knows where a curb is. He figures it out, and he remembers it. And he knows exactly.
And he knows how to talk to you.
Yes.
You.
And, that's why I'm wondering then, would that show like on a deal, because where it supposedly your memory is or whatever, if that would be larger in size, and where he would have the eyesight or hearing, would it be real tiny?
So if we just replace the word size with network,
okay,
then you could be onto something. So what happens is as you're developing as a human, within the first 6 years of your life, you have a really big network of neurons, and it's the biggest network you have is when you're 6. You spend the next 15 years losing most of the connections between most of your neurons. It's called synaptic pruning. And so that probably could happen, where because Rail was born blind and deaf, is that what you said? Mm-hmm. That maybe the synaptic pruning, where he's losing connections, is a totally different pattern than a dog that could see and could hear for the rest of their life. So anyway, thank you.
I mean, he can meet
really
somebody and 2 years later meet them again and know exactly who they are.
That's super cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So you were talking about whether or not domestication had an effect on, I think it was with the cups.
Mm-hmm. Cooperative communication.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And you started talking about the foxes, and I don't know if I ever caught if that changed anything.
Oh, you know what? You're great. Thank you for asking me that, because I forgot to say that. In fact, as I was talking, in my head, I was like, oh, I forgot to say that I went to Siberia and I tested their cognition, and that what we found was that the experimental foxes that were selected to be friendly were better at using cooperative communicative gestures of humans, even though they weren't selected for that. And the control line looked like wolves, and sort of, they could do it a little bit, but not really. So, which was a big surprise for me, because I actually thought that you would have to select the foxes to be smarter if you wanted a smarter fox. But actually, you just select for a friendlier fox if you want a social savvy fox.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for helping me.
Hi, thank you. I'm a developmental psychologist, so
Cool.
I'm very interested in that comparative data. But a lot of the aspects that you're talking about, memory and cunning,
Sure.
and referring to executive function, if I understand correctly, these are inherent differences before they go through the training program that you see these breed differences, or?
So the Cognition data is just people's pets. The data from the assistance dogs and the military dogs, that's before training.
Okay, so is that something that you think can be trained in some dogs better than other, practicing inhibiting or self-control?
It's interesting you say that because we can look at that question with Cognition data because we ask people what their sort of training regime is. And people may not accurately report it, but we have a big sample, so at least it would give us an idea. We have done that a little bit, and it doesn't seem to be a screaming relationship, but it could also be that our tests aren't very good or something.
Yeah.
So I do think that dogs can learn to inhibit in certain contexts, but where I would be less certain is, so let's say I train my dog to be really good at sitting and staying, and we practice that with a lot of elbow grease, even though it's a small brain dog and it's not going to have a lot of inhibitory control, those chihuahuas, you know. I don't think that being good in that one context then makes them, that doesn't translate to another context. I think it would probably be very context specific. They would learn to do that in that one situation. Whereas if you're a bigger dog that has a little bit more inhibitory control, you're going to be able to inhibit in more situations with much less work.
Right, thank you. I know it has a lot of questions that for humans, if small children aren't good at inhibiting, how can we help them improve? So
That's right, and the truth is, we're just figuring out these relationships. So with developmental psychology, with Walter Michel's work and the marshmallow test, where you give a child a marshmallow and you say, "Oh, we'll be back in a few minutes. If you don't eat this, I'll bring you more." And then you measure how long it is before the kid pops the marshmallow in their mouth, and it's so predictive of life outcomes. There were training studies then, because that relationship was found, and could you train kids and with that effect? And we've just discovered these relationships, so I don't know. I mean, for the trainers in the room, that would be something to think about with them.
thank you.
So how you were saying that the labs were generally like the most for the bomb detectives and the family assistant ones, or at least in that one area, they weren't really in the top 3 for any of the things that you showed on the slide. So what makes labs like so special to be in those areas whenever spaniels, the types of spaniels were usually in the top 3?
That's a great question. I think that without data, there's a lot of ideas about and history of what a dog has been selected for. So Labradors have a history of retrieving and fetching, and especially hunting lines of Labrador retrievers are bred to be totally hyperactive and uninhibited and go search and retrieve, and those are exactly the skill sets you need if you're detecting bombs. And the Labrador retrievers that are the assistance dogs, I could show you 100 pictures of them and I'd say, okay, try to pick out the bomb detecting in the service dog, and most people, I think, would really struggle to pick out which came from which population. But the assistance dogs, they've been bred for 40 years to be totally calm and inhibited and just sweet and delightful and attracted to strangers. They're more interested in new people than they are in the people they're with. I actually have one in my home that is Congo, my dog that Debbie introduced, my best friend at home. And if somebody walks in our door, he could care less about his family. He is so interested in the new people. Even though both these populations look like Labrador retrievers, they're really different from one another. And I think that labs were chosen for historical reasons and the perception of what the breed had been bred for as a working breed. But I think that in some cases for detection work, let's say beagles being used for customs or whatever, it may be because of the data on brain size that maybe that needs to be reevaluated. Maybe different dogs based on cognitive work might do a little bit better. I don't know. I mean, it's a hypothesis that's worth testing maybe. So thank you for asking. That's a good question. So if there are no more questions, maybe I should wrap it up. And then I know there are books here, and I'd be happy to sign books if people would like me to, or I can just hang out and more questions people have, I can ask them individually. I mean, answer them individually, or ask you questions individually. Thank you.